And that brings us on to our talk. And yeah, like what we're talking about today. And we have our fabulous guest, Teresa, who is the founder of A Greener Festival. And I'm not going to introduce you because I'm sure you're far more equipped to do that yourself. But it would be great if you could introduce yourself to the crowd and everyone at home. And tell us about what you do.
Okay, so I'm Teresa Moore and I'm a director at A Greener Festival. We're not quite as old as Greenpeace. We were founded in 2006, and it's quite a nice story because in my former life I used to be a head of department at a university for music and event management, and one of my students did an undergraduate dissertation on audience attitudes at music festivals to their impact on the environment. And she collected loads of data and got a really good degree out of it. But a couple of colleagues, one of whom was Ben Chalice, who was the global media rights lawyer, general counsel for Glastonbury, myself and a couple of other people thought, this is really interesting. Let's put it up on a website. And so 2006, we put this up on a website, and the website crashed within 2 weeks. So we knew that people wanted to know more and that they couldn't find any information anywhere else. So in 2007, we thought, right, what are we going to do with this? Let's create something which helps festivals. So we started with music festivals, that's where it all started, to appreciate their environmental impact. And let's look at some practical things that we can suggest to help them reduce that impact, given that the results of the research showed that the audiences were concerned about the impact. They were concerned about waste, they were concerned about travel and transport, energy, and so on and so forth. So we created a little checklist, and actually turned out to be 100 questions, and that was trialled because we had students from across Europe as well as the UK at festivals in Holland, Germany, Finland and the UK, tested it out, came up with this 100-question checklist, and that became our first set of questions to put together what is now our certification and our criteria for assessing how events are actually doing in terms of the measures they're putting in place, what their impact is on the environment, and what sorts of things that we can suggest that we've seen to help them reduce that impact. So 15 or so years later, we've worked with over 600 different events, starting with music festivals, Glastonbury, Roskilde, which is the biggest one in Europe, Ziget in Hungary, but things like Lightning in the Bottle in the US. This year we're going to be working with Burning Man. I'm just trying to think of the ones in Australia. But right across Europe, the Far East, and so on and so forth, US and Canada, and South America actually as well. So we've worked with over 600 events on all continents apart from the Arctic and the Antarctic. And from that, 2015, there was a bit of a hiatus because we've been going for a long time, but it's one of those things where for years people didn't on the whole take it particularly seriously. So I was just saying a little bit earlier to Maja, what standardly happened if an event, a festival in particular, wanted to do something about the environmental impact, they'd usually just say, oh, well, your health and safety, you can do that as well, and just bung it onto their job. And they were lumbered because they didn't know anything about it, and yet they had to do something about this. Since that time, and we were wondering, well, should we go on? We couldn't see a shift. Things weren't really changing that much. We'd worked really hard with these events, and there's some great events out there. People have been doing it for years, like Green Gathering in Wales and Green Man and so on and so forth. But generally, we couldn't see a shift. Shall we carry on? And actually, we contacted all the festivals that we work with, and they said, yeah, please carry on, please carry on. However, I think that, for us, COVID and that time out to reflect, there has been an absolute sea change in attitude. So over this period, really from 2015, 2016, but particularly those 2 years, suddenly this is not an add-on anymore. People realise this is absolutely central to everything that they do and is incredibly important and a reflection on the event itself. So now you see that most events have an environmental manager. They never used to. Those environmental managers are really clued up. They know their stuff rather than having to sort of just, go away and find something out if they could. They're often environmental scientists or have had proper training. We offer our own training as well. So it's been an absolute sea change in that. And to be honest, as an organisation, from that low point in 2015 where we were wondering whether we should carry on, we have never been so busy. We are absolutely inundated, which is hard work, but it's absolutely magic as well, because you realise that people have got the message and they want to do something to change how they operate. So that's quite a long response.
No, that's great.
Wanted to give you that story.
I think it's really encouraging to see the change in mentality in the music industry itself. I guess that 2015 mark also kind of marks where the Paris Agreement kind of came in as well. So it's kind of a big kind of public shift in mindset, real understanding that climate change is something that we actually really need to take seriously now. And it's great to see that in the music industry is doing that already. I know that you mentioned that you have like a criteria that you assess different festivals and events on. I wonder if you could talk more about that. Like, what are the criteria? How do people be more green?
Yep. So what we look at basically 11, but that's expanding a little bit more. On the environmental side, we're looking at things like ecological impacts, and you might think, well, so what sorts of things are those? Bearing in mind we're often looking at outdoor events, but not exclusively anymore. It's things like soil. What impact does your festival or your outdoor event, it could be a park-based event or something like that, have on the soil, on the local ecology? We're only beginning to realise, we as society, how important our soil is. That in the UK we've probably got 100 harvests left before we've wrecked it completely with fertilisers and all the other additives. So soil is one thing, and if you think about those iconic pictures of Glastonbury again, where people are mud surfing and all the rest, great fun, but what does that really mean to the ecology? It means that soil is just running away. We're losing that topsoil. And if you multiply that, we did an event, looked at one in Hyde Park, again, where they didn't have, and a lot of events do have trackway now for people to walk on to protect the soil and the ground, but where you haven't got that, you see this enormous runoff, the mud. And what it means is, in reality, you are losing that soil, which is really precious stuff, and of course all the things that live in it. So other ecological things, there's something called natural capital. I don't know whether you've heard of it, but it's looking at placing a value on nature. So in the past, or even today, we value things in nature by what we can turn them into. So trees are valued as a crop for wood that we can use to build stuff with. And that's how we look at trees, generally, as being a resource that we can use for something else. So increasingly, natural capital says we need to recognise that nature should be valued in its own terms. So that tree, the value is not the wood that we can use for something else. The value is having that tree there, that 200-year-old tree or whatever. And we're beginning to see that in contracts. So instead of having a contract which just includes, obviously, terms and conditions, artists and all the rest of it, we've got things like, if you are holding your festival or event in a park and you damage those trees, there's going to be a cost. So in that cost, in some parks, we've seen contracts £30,000 for a fine for the damage done to an old tree. That is an example of natural capital. where you're actually saying we're putting a value on nature, and if you damage it, there will be a financial penalty. So look out, protect those natural things. So there's the ecological side, but there's also all the ones that we're more familiar with, like travel and transport, one of the big three emitters, energy, and the sort of development of what we call smart energy, thinking about how we use energy, being more efficient, and we can save an awful lot of power just by being more efficient. And food, big three. Food is one of the production of food, obviously particularly meat and dairy is one of the big emitters, big three emitters. So that's part of the classification. Water and sewerage, it's the poor relation of the others. Nobody really thinks.
Not very glamorous.
It's not very glamorous. We've got a friend who does work for us, and she'll be doing some work for us next month, whose whole focus is on toilets and
what
water.
a job.
What a job. But really important. The very worst thing, those bloody awful blue chemical blues. If you think about, they stink for a start, and that represents those chemicals and what the hell happens to those chemicals. They go into our system and they're just horrible, and we can do a whole lot better than that. And there are lots of solutions out there. So water and sewerage, being, conserving our water. Collecting grey water. So grey water is not sewerage, it's the sort of stuff, dishwater, shower water, hand washing basin water. Some events will collect that, and that will be filtrated and recycled so that you can use it again. So there's all sorts of issues to do with water. Then we look at communication, we look at efforts to change people's, how you influence, you use music to influence your audience, to change their habits. But we're also increasingly looking at social impact of events as well. So, just the sorts of topics that you just talked about, diversity, inclusion, how that operates within the sort of event sphere and the teams that are going on. So that, again, social impact has probably been of the three, economic impact, everybody measures that because you've got to survive. Environmental impact, the next one, but social impact is the one that we've seen in the last few years really getting some credence, and people recognising that that's just as important as well. So that's a sort of a brush stroke across our criteria.
Yeah, it's a lot.
A lot.
I think it's no wonder that people find it a bit kind of overwhelming when they start to try and understand the impacts of anything that they do on the climate, because there are just so many things that kind of go towards messing up the planet, annoyingly. I'm going to pick up on a few of the things that you said, because I think one of the ones that stuck out to me was travel, because I think travel is quite a clear way that dance music and all music really impacts the climate, whether it's flying artists to do sets, or even just all the thousands of people going to, whether it's a dance event or a festival, whatever it is, it all adds up really. And I know there's a climate collective called Clean Scene, which released a report, I think it was last year, called Last Night a DJ Took a Flight. And they looked at exactly that. And they basically used resident advisor data to sample the top 1,000 DJs. And they looked at their 2019 touring schedules and then worked out their carbon footprints. And what they found was actually really, surprised me anyway. They basically found that the average DJ flight carbon footprint was double the impact of even the world's highest super emitters. And they found that DJs emit 35 tons of carbon, which doesn't necessarily sound like a lot, but then when you compare it to the recommended personal carbon budget, which is 2 tons, it's 17 times as much. So there's obviously a massive issue there. But what can really be done about that? Because does that just mean we have to stop DJs touring? Because I know one of my favourite DJs is Coco Bryce, and they're from the Netherlands. And I know that I'd be devastated if I knew that I would never be able to see them perform. So what can be done about that? Well, how can we minimise the impact of flying and DJs and touring and stuff?
So we launched Greener Festival Touring last year, and we've already done one. We went out with Bring Me the Horizon tour, and that was a UK-based tour, but the idea was to actually look at a one country tour and just see what could be done to reduce the impact. And very common sense, straightforward things that you think, oh, why don't they do that? But actually, when you look at most touring, whether it's DJ, small bands, big bands, the management who book all the tour, venues or the locations of the tour, is not thinking about reducing travel miles. It's thinking about, oh, well, let's get to the next gig. And so if you actually map out these tours, they're all over the shop. So you might be in the south for one gig, back up north for another, perhaps over the east for another, then back to the same city for another part of the tour, then back down to the south in the same or adjacent city for another gig. And it's all over the shop. And one of the things we looked at was how could we rationalise that travel so that they weren't zigzagging about all over the country. They were actually, the tour was designed so that you'd move on from one to the other, but keep those locations close together when you were in, say, the north of the part of the country, so that you weren't travelling backwards and forwards needlessly. So you just travel from one event to the other within the same area. And that made a huge difference. And it wasn't rocket science. It was just thinking that if you're zigzagging all over the place, your travel miles are going to be huge, unnecessarily so. So let's work with the management and the venues to try and streamline the scheduling of these gigs. And that's what we did. So that was a big element of it. And as I said, it's one of the big three emitters, travel and touring. So, there are other things that you can do. We're trying to encourage, if you're going to tour in Europe, not flying, use the train. That's okay if you're a smaller band and you don't have big production values. If you've got to ship a load of kit, that's up until now been a big thing, because it's not just you, the artist, travelling, but it's all the gear that you bring with you, and that adds to it as well. So, think about the production values and how you actually design this. Perhaps a bit simpler for DJs, but for artists, do you have to have all this stuff? Can we look at the whole production a bit differently to cut down on the huge amount of stuff that goes in the wake of the artist and sometimes the DJ? So there are lots of elements to do with travel and transport that, it's just thinking about it, not assuming, oh, we've always done it like this, so we're going to carry on. Let's just strip it right down, examine it, and think about what we're doing and how we can do that in a more sensible way, really.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. One way that I've seen some people, when they kind of, maybe trains aren't an option, or maybe they do have loads of equipment or something, one thing that I've seen artists try and do is carbon offsetting. I think carbon offsetting is quite a controversial topic. In case, maybe I should explain what that is, in case people are just completely lost. But basically, so the net zero target that I mentioned earlier is basically, it means that the amount of carbon that we produce will equate to the amount of carbon that we remove, hence net. I like to call net zero actually not zero, because we're not actually reducing as much as we should. We're just kind of trying to balance out. And unfortunately, that a lot of the time does rely on carbon offsetting. So carbon offsetting is basically a scheme where either individuals or companies or governments can invest in environmental projects to remove the amount of carbon from the atmosphere to balance out their carbon footprint from the carbon that they apparently can't reduce. That can be anything from renewable energy projects, investing in them, or investing in planting trees, or even kind of sponsoring a bit of existing forest so that it's not cut down, so that it can continue to take up carbon in photosynthesis. And whilst, especially I think the tree ones, people think, oh, planting trees, how could that possibly be bad? More trees is always good, apparently. Unfortunately, it's not. there are so many kind of complexities that come with carbon offsetting, and kind of tying into what I was talking about at the beginning about climate justice. A lot of the time, the places that people plant the trees are places in the global south because it's cheaper. And there are loads of problems that come with that. For example, sometimes companies, mainly from the global north, will kind of come into a place in the global south, kick out loads of indigenous people from that ancestral land, and then kill them for trying to come back in. So there's loads, there's so many issues that come with it, but obviously not every single carbon offsetting project is bad. But one thing that I would definitely say about that is if you are a touring DJ or someone that's bringing someone over who wants to tour, check out who you're buying your offsets from, because they can be really, really awful and not climate justice friendly. But I know you also have other views on carbon offsetting.
Carbon offsetting. And I agree, it should be renewables. I like the idea of insetting, which is local and perhaps even within an organisation, as opposed to those far off distant lands, which we don't really know what is going on. I'll give you another little story, because we do our own training, because we have assessors, we train assessors to go in and have a look at events and what they're doing. And there was a guy actually from Greece who was on the course, and he was saying he just finished some work for the Olympic Committee, because they were meeting in Greece, near Athens, home of the Olympics, and looking at offsetting schemes that they could invest in to offset that event, which was a sort of meeting of the Olympic Committee and all the people from the various areas who'd flown in. So he'd done this research, and they'd come up with this tree planting scheme somewhere in the Far East. And I can't remember, it's not last year, it must have been the year before perhaps. One summer, whether it's 2020 or 2021, Greece had horrific forest fires. I mean, really serious, and they went quite close to Athens. And I said, you know, why wouldn't the Olympic Committee invest in a tree planting scheme to replace all of those trees that have been lost due to climate change and forest fires around Athens locally, and benefit the local people, rather than, you know, some scheme that we can't really track in some distant land.
Probably causing havoc somewhere else.
But it seemed, you know, why can't we shift our focus? You know, this was a very real problem. It had only happened, I think, the forest fires, they'd only managed to finish them, put them out the previous month. There's a huge amount of devastation. Why not plant the trees there? I don't know, why not? Obviously, there are political reasons. There's what we call philanthropic capitalism. So there's a big word. You know, so we're doing some, you know, northwestern sort of powers are doing some good in another area that needs help or something like that. You know, it just doesn't smack. You know, it's not right.
I think anything with the word capitalism is a no for me.
Well, but the other tree planting thing is, if you just have to look at the stats. So, and I actually love trees. I have nothing against planting trees, but let's be clear what we're doing and why we're doing it. So the stats are, and this is from Imperial College London, there's something called the Grantham Institute, which specialises in environmental sciences. 21 kilograms. If you plant a tree, after 10 years, it will sequester, draw in, about 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide in a year. How many tonnes does the average?
35, I think it was, 37, 35.
Tonnes. It will take 100 years for a tree to mature enough to sequester 2 tonnes of carbon dioxide. The music industry as a whole, outdoor festivals, in 2018, I think, 28,500 tonnes of emissions. So let's get this right, put it in perspective. You're going to have to plant a hell of a lot of trees and wait a long time for any results, any tangible results. So when you get on your flight and you tick the box, yeah, I'm going to give you a £5 to plant trees, job done. You know, I'm on a moral high now. I've offsetted my travel and it's all good, hunky-dory. Actually, no, it's not. You know, you need to look into this. If you say that you're going to plant trees for legacy, or better still, you know, let's not chop them down in the first place, then all for it, because that, you know, we're clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it. But the idea that by ticking the box, giving our £5, and we've just offsetted our emissions, well, it's just not true. The science tells us it's not true. It will take 100 years for that to happen. I'll give you another example. I was talking about HS2, which is another one of my pet things. But trees have to be looked after. You can't just, you know, stick them in the ground, especially if you're doing a sort of plantation, which is what they do, and leave them be. Now, I'm talking about UK. I'm not talking about some forest in Southeast Asia that we know nothing about. In the UK, not too far from where I live, as a mitigation, HS2 planted 60,000 saplings in a field, and that was supposed to offset. And this is the ridiculous part of it, the embodied, if you know what embodied carbon is. So that's the carbon taken to actually manufacture or produce something. And for HS2, it's huge. Those 60,000 saplings were all planted, and 2020, so the spring after the autumn when they were planted, we had a drought. It
They all
was
die.
cheaper to let a whole lot die, so you had a field of twigs, than to water them.
Wow.
So the whole lot died. That was it. So there's, you know, the more you dig into this whole tree planting thing, the worse it gets. So my plea is, yes, let's plant trees, but let's be absolutely clear what we're doing and why we're doing it. And we are not offsetting anything, not for, you know, at least minimally 10 years, but 100 years to make any real difference. So let's not chop them down in the first place.
Yeah.
Isn't that a good idea?
Yeah, I think as soon as anything kind of becomes a money-making scheme, like the trees that you were just talking about, it just all goes to shit, really. But yeah, I think another kind of thing that I guess, coming back to the travel and dance music and all that, I think one way that she's kind of sprung to mind is that to minimise the amount that people are travelling, to celebrate local. I think that's really important, something that people don't really kind of talk about that much. I think Leeds is actually really good for it. I know that I feel like there's like kind of running joke just in life where people are like, oh, everyone's a DJ now, blah, blah, blah. But actually, like, let's use them. Like, there's so many really great DJs dotted around the whole of the UK, kind of, yeah, just homing in and get like, yeah, grow them at home, basically. I think that, do you ever kind of, I don't know, encourage any of the events that you put onto? I don't know if do you ever say over the lineup? I don't know. That would be cool.
Not really, no. We don't get that big a say,
Alas.
I'm afraid. But, you know, we can sort of point out, and I think that, you know, a lot of events do realise that actually there are very good reasons on top of the environment to bring in local acts where you can do that, and some events will focus on that. But sadly, no, we don't have a say in the lineup.
Oh well.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, why don't we move on to one of the other kind of things, the categories that you were talking about? I mean, one of the ones that stood out to me was the kind of unglamorous stuff. I know when you were talking about soil and toilets, I was like, well, at Greenpeace, I am a plastics campaigner, and I look a lot about plastic waste and waste exports, which is, again, very unglamorous. Didn't think I'd find it so interesting, but it's actually a really, really interesting topic. And I think plastic is one of the quite obvious ways that events and festivals clearly have environmental issues. Like plastic cups and things, it's kind of, whenever you go to, whether it's a day festival or just a night event or just any festival really. I was at a festival the other weekend called Bangface, I don't know if anyone knows what that is. It's a very wild festival at Pontins in Southport. Anyway, they were all plastic cups, and as a plastics campaigner at Greenpeace, I was just like, oh my God, this is awful. And I know that from working at Greenpeace, one of the solutions that we push is something called the deposit return scheme. And for anyone that doesn't know what that is, you might have experienced it if you've been to maybe Germany or another European country. They kind of do it on a big scale, which is where you as the customer get an incentive for returning your containers, whether that's plastic. People also do it for aluminium and various different kind of materials. And so it's a win-win really, because you as the customer gets money, great. And when because it incentivizes people to do it, more people do it, so we get more plastic returning and being recycled or reused, and it also comes back in a much better condition. And now I've seen this at festivals, and I remember when I first came across it, I was a bit like, oh God, why am I paying £5 for a cup? Shit. But actually, I think it's, well, I mean, you can tell me more about it, but from what I gather, it seems to be a really good way of kind of implementing that more circular economy where we don't just use something to throw it away, but we actually kind of look at, how that can be reused and kind of go on to be used again and again and again. So I'm assuming that you probably know loads about that. So tell us more.
Okay, well, I agree with everything you said. I mean, it is a great example of circularity and the circular economy, so that it's not thrown away, it gets reused. And how the schemes generally work is that the event or festival will bring in enough cups for what they estimate each person, the number of times that they will get a drink. So it might be 4, might be 5 times, and they'll bring in enough
10 for me, at least.
We'll only have 1. So they'll bring in enough cups to cover that. And so when you go up to the bar, you bring your cup back and they'll give you a fresh cup, but all of those cups are collected at the end, taken off site, washed, ready for the next event. And that way you are saving a huge amount of plastic waste. And I think that, that has really gathered steam over the last few years. There were some worries during COVID. So what about, transmission, contamination? Should people bring their own cups? And that was something we saw that definitely don't, because the risk of contamination was even higher if you were getting people to refill your own cup. But, we seem to have calmed down from that sort of worry now, and definitely more and more events are using these circular cup systems, the returnable cup. So the next question is actually with the returnable cup, so what should it be made out of? What is the best material currently to cut our impact down? So we're doing it already by reusing, but there's an issue about, so how long will these things last? And clearly, if you've got a metal cup, bearing in mind if you went to Wembley Stadium for a football match, you would not be allowed to have a metal cup. There's health and safety and all sorts of other issues. But if you've got a metal cup, that is the one that is going to be reusable for the longest, and obviously you can melt it down at the end and turn it into something else. Perfect. The only problem is this embodied carbon. So how much carbon is emitted in making that metal cup? And actually it's quite high. We've got some research on our website that you can access for nothing, which currently, and this is the disappointing thing, is that still the plastic recycled cup is the lowest emitter at the moment. So it's because the embodied carbon is so low in its manufacture. It lasts, the good ones last roughly 8 times of usage, and then obviously they're sent off to be melted down and you can turn them into something else. So that's not particularly what you want to hear. You want to hear other materials are better, but just as things stand at the moment, the recyclable plastic cup is probably still the best alternative out there. I think things will change. Obviously, once metal cups become more established and there's greater use, the more times they're reused, the proportionate emissions go down. But just as things stand at the moment, that's where we're at.
That's interesting about the metal and the embodied carbon, because I mean, at Greenpeace, we have really tight procurement standards about what we can and can't purchase. I was looking at trying to make some merch for this campaign that I'm working on at the moment, and I was like, well, it's a recycling campaign, surely reusable bottles, that's a great incentive to, you know, give to people, but it pretty much, by our very high Greenpeace standards, it's really, really hard to find any company that makes kind of steel bottles to the right standard, because I mean a lot of them are made in factories that are powered by coal, which means that we can't use them. It's just a whole shit show, unfortunately. It's really annoying to say that plastic is the best, because plastic is made of oil and we hate the oil companies, but it's all very complex. But at the moment, I mean, I've got loads of those plastic cups from festivals. I actually really like them. They're great for picnics. So yeah, we love that. I wonder if that kind of, I've only ever really seen that kind of deposit scheme with cups used at festivals. I wonder, is that kind of even possible on a smaller scale for just like one day events? I don't know, do people do that?
On the smaller events, it's probably quite expensive to do.
Yeah.
So you really do need to have quite a big footfall to make that worthwhile. But I think it's like everything, isn't it? Supply and demand. Mm-hmm. As it becomes more common at the bigger events, so the cost of that will go down for smaller events. So, you know, this is where we need that real sea change in all the events, the bigger events, moving towards a circular cup system, and then it can filter down to the smaller events who haven't got quite so much money to spend on it. And that's how it's worked. It's working with, you know, all sorts of different aspects like that at the moment.
I see. All right, well, I don't know how we're doing for time, but I was thinking it would be a fun, nice thing to do for maybe I wonder if you have like some top tips for people who enjoy dance music and want to, whether they're kind of putting on an event or they're someone that attends an event or even someone that plays an event, if you have maybe a few, maybe, I don't know if easy is the right word, but kind of accessible things that people can do to make those make sure that their dance music love is not also bad for the environment.
I think it's for each person, and I'm going to talk about the audience first of all. It's just thinking about, you know, what you do. So how do you travel? What do you do when you get there? You know, is what you what sort of food are you eating when you get? These are all small things that personally people individually can make changes to. So, you know, one of the sort of, well, it's not really surprising, but it is in some ways, is that for events in cities, our data shows that on average 26% of the audience still drives. If it's a greenfield site, 56% of the audience still drives. And that figure hasn't changed in, that 56% particular hasn't changed in over a decade. Now we can say, oh, you know, partly the infrastructure, and this is government again, that infrastructure needs to improve to allow people to do that. But there are other alternatives like big green coaches and other things that people can do to change their travel. But also, you know, what food are you eating? Perhaps, you know, not have the ham sandwich, but try something else, which is vegetarian or vegan. You know, and those small individual things can mount up if everybody is examining their lifestyle and how they're getting to the events and what they're doing at the event. And also, you know, that bit of cellophane that was wrapping something, give it back to the people who sold it to you. You know, I've done this at supermarkets actually.
What's the response?
Well, you know, they don't quite, nobody says much.
Don't know if I've got the nerve.
There's been a bit of a movement, but you know, take it all off and give it back. I don't want it. You know, I don't really need you to sell me it in that. So here, have it back. If everybody did that, I think manufacturers would think twice, you know, food retailers, about wrapping everything in hermetically sealed plastic the whole time. So, you know, these small things. So it's about thinking about what you do and how you do it and what small changes you can make, and they can add up. And then on the sort of artist side, the DJ side, it is definitely thinking about working with management who are booking your gigs to look at how you can actually be a bit more logical and not zigzag all over the place, and whether that tour can be, you know, do one area first and then move on, rather than backwards and forwards. And often this is not just within the country, it's backwards and forwards to Europe. The number of artists who do one gig in the UK, then off to Germany, then back to the UK, then down to Spain or wherever, it just is crazy. So, you know, the artists can try to put some pressure, and this is difficult for small up and coming artists that don't necessarily have a voice and are just grateful for the gig. But where possible, you know, just say, can we work together to make this a more sensible tour? And let's plan it rather than just take what comes up. We produced something with an agency that's just been sold again, actually acquired by something. So they're not called Paradigm anymore, music management company. We created a green rider. Artist green riders have been out there for quite a while. You know, Jack Johnson had his own, but there are lots of, Radiohead had one, and even back to Pearl Jam, I think around 2000 had something as well. But the idea was working with the management company rather than the individual artists, was that those small artists, whether they're DJs or musicians, the management company could put this green rider in for all of their artists. So it wasn't just one, you know, sort of up and coming artist who didn't have much of a voice and certainly didn't have any financial clout like Coldplay to say, right, we're doing this. Go to the management company and try and get them to instigate something for all of their artists on their roster. So in that way, you've got a collective voice rather than just, you know, individual artists trying to pick this off one at a time. And I think, you know, for us, that was a good strategic move to go to the management company. The other thing, which we haven't talked about, which I'm just going to chuck in now, because we launched our Greener Tour, but we also launched our Greener Arena. And that is looking at what the artist or the DJ, the management company are doing, and the venue is doing. And how can you work together to make sure that your objectives, you know, you're trying to achieve the same things. And increasingly, this is not small venues. I know it's not happening to any great extent with small venues, but bigger venues certainly are doing quite a lot. The big change was when Live Green, which has come out of the live arm of UK Music, brought together the whole of the live industry, the different elements, including venues, to say, we need to all be facing in the same direction and working towards the same goals, because the music industry is incredibly siloed and everybody is in their own little patch, and it's no good being in your little patch and just trying to do your little bit. The whole industry needs to work together. So that was a big thing, the Live Green sort of charter. But we've also launched our Greener Arena, which has been really taken up by the big arenas. And again, it's to say, you know, we work with the artists and the festivals, let's have a look at the venues, let's get everybody on the same page so that we're all working together to make this difference.
Nice one. Okay. Collaboration. We love
that.
Well, I feel like it would be nice to get some time for questions. But I will also say a few things as well, because I think, like we've kind of mentioned, I guess throughout the whole talk, is that it's, whilst tackling the climate should be down to the government, they're not doing enough. But it is why we elect them, it's why we give them our money. And a lot of things that do need to change, like you just mentioned, like the infrastructure stuff, is kind of a systemic thing that comes from top down. So whilst I'm here, I would say, as obviously this is kind of aimed at the youth, the climate movement is really being led by the youth at the moment, and it's really inspiring to see. And there's like so many amazing groups like Green New Deal Rising, I don't know if anyone's heard of them, but they're great. They had a viral video that was on social media recently where some really amazing activists stood up at a Tory conference and just called out Priti Patel for her pretty fascist immigration, nationality and borders bill, which was great. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But kind of that, I think, I mean, again, with like the whole collaboration thing, kind of looking at ways that we can collaborate with these groups which are doing really important, challenging the government to do better on a bigger scale is really important. And I would also say that, like one of the most powerful things that we can do is lobby the government, and events are such a powerful way to do that. I think you mentioned that as one of the things that in your criteria as the kind of wider impact that events that you're putting on can have. Events can be great for lobbying decision makers, they can be great for raising money, which then goes on to help the climate. It can be great for just kind of getting climate on people's radar. I mean, in terms of lobbying, I don't know if anyone knows an event called Club Verboten. It's basically it's like a kink event, but they play a lot of techno. They have playrooms. Basically, people dress up in very little clothing and have a lot of fun. And they usually hold that in a space called E1 in Tower Hamlets in London. But that borough recently told them that they weren't allowed to hold the event at their usual space because of some really old kind of draconian laws that weren't really to do with the event space. And there was and still is worry that more and more councils are going to kind of use that to shut down kink spaces altogether. And so what they did was after this news, they turned their next event into a protest rave. So beforehand, they were trying to get as many people as possible, all of their supporters and people that go to the event, to reach out to the councillors, email their MPs, all that sort of stuff, and kind of get the whole lobbying stuff pre-event, which was great. And loads of people did it because loads of people really cared about the cause, which wasn't actually techno, but it was it was all incorporated, which was great. And then at the event, they also had loads of people holding banners. They had like a room where people came together and made allies to talk about the kink space. It was really great. And I can just, when I saw that, I was just like, I could see that working so well for other important things like the climate. And in terms of kind of raising money, Greenpeace, again, big up Greenpeace, has a field at Glastonbury every year, and they have a field where I think they had a rave tree last year, not last year, obviously festivals weren't on last year, but the year before. Sounds great. They have lots of environmentally focused fun, but they also use that as an opportunity to get climate on the radar for people that are just having fun, accosting people and telling them about the climate, but people love it. And they also get people to sign up and give money and loads of different things. So like I said, events are just a really great opportunity to kind of be creative with helping the climate. And yeah, as is music, again, something that you said, I don't think that there's enough climate music. I'm all for some sort of, I don't know, climate justice jungle tune or some green garage. I would love to see that. So if anyone makes that, please hit me up. I'd love to see it. But yeah, I guess on that note, I don't know what the time is, but if anyone in the audience has any questions that they would like to ask, we'd be more than happy to answer them. Anybody? Oh, hello.
Yeah. I was wondering about the actual venues as kind of the effect of like different types of festival sites on their environmental impact, thinking about ones that are in more rural, more urban locations. Like for an example, I was supposed to be going to Primavera this year.
Oh yeah.
But that's right in the middle of Barcelona.
Yeah.
Barcelona has loads of problems with overtours of people coming in from everywhere. But it's right in the middle of an urban environment. Then I think to another festival where I've gone to where it's in the absolute middle of nowhere and it's like green space everywhere, and the effect of the noise and the light on the local plants and animals and stuff.
Yeah, so what?
What's an ideal festival site?
That's a really hard question.
So what was the question? What's the
ideal
festival site? Is it rural? Is it not? Is it city? Great question.
It is a great question. I think it depends on what your criteria are. So we've assessed Primavera Sound for many years. In fact, they're going to give us an award this summer, which is brilliant, actually, for the work that we've done with them. And you're right, they're city bound, but they've also got the ocean not too far away. So, they've got to protect that as well as the urban site. I think it's what your criteria are. So, you know, is it that you feel that ecological damage is so important that perhaps staging something in the middle of nowhere where, you know, it's quite hard to protect all the ecologies, that's your number one thing, then you shouldn't be doing it. I think I'm not somebody who says we should start banning things left, right and centre. I think we have to find solutions as far as possible so that, you know, we want some, I think there's Wilderness Festival, for example, in amongst the trees. We want things like that because we want people to experience nature, and perhaps when they experience nature, even if it is a music festival, they might appreciate it a bit more. If you never see it, you've never been to a remote thing, then you don't know that can be damaged, or you don't know what it's like, or whether it needs protecting. So I wouldn't ban any of these things. I think city-wise, in some ways it's a bit easier because you do have infrastructure. Obviously, in the middle of nowhere, you've got to bring in everything. But in the city, you've got, for example, you've got the grid. So you should be able to get your power off the grid. Not always, because some events, city-based events, are still using horrible diesel generators by the ton. But, you know, we've got to think about that. If you're in city, you should be able to get power off the grid. And also, you should be able to get green power off the grid. If it's transport, you should be able to use public transport in the city. You should be able to use the sewerage network in the city rather than having chemical loos and all the rest of it. So there are definite advantages with urban-based events. But having said that, you know, people do love being out in nature and being out in greenfield sites as well. And perhaps we need to we need a stronger message, but we do need to experience that, because how else are we going to understand that that's another environment that we've got to look after if we never see it, or you know, that part of the generation never sees it. So each type of setting has its own issues, but I guess if you were going to say, so what are the advantages? Probably an urban city event, you know, there's a lot more that you can work with that's already there. But do we all want to go to events in the middle of a city? Not necessarily,
yeah.
You know.
I feel like that sounds like it's quite a case-by-case thing, I guess. I mean, for me, I don't know, on a personal level, I love living up in a festival, but at the same time, Carnival and Shambhala on the same weekend, and my friends are like, come to Shambhala, Maya. I'm like, why would I go to Shambhala and go far away when I can just sleep in my own bed and travel on and like have like a 5-minute travel? Like, it's very... Yeah. It depends, I think. Yeah. For sure.
I'm not into thinking that we should ban everything. I think we've got, you know, as far as we can, find solutions. It may be that we do end up doing that. Things get so bad. But, you know, like, there are a lot of things that we can do today that will make a difference before we get to the point of having to ban stuff.
Agreed. Low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit, yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Anybody? No, that's fine. No pressure. Well, I guess that's it then. I guess if anyone does think of any other questions that they would like to ask, I think we've both been tagged on all the Instagrams, so do give us a message if there's anything that you think either of us could answer. But yeah, I guess that's it then. That's it from us.
Thanks very much, Maya.
Thanks, everybody.